conversation with Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Ring Rees-Mogg. Put your calls to Jacob Rees-Mogg now. 0345 6060 973. This is LBC.
Good morning, 3 minutes after 9 on Monday, April the 15th. Before we go to Ring Rees-Mogg, Jacob Rees-Mogg, I should tell you, is in position, but I'll ask him to pause because news breaking at this time. You're listening to LBC. 46-year-old Paul Bassetti has been charged over a video posted online of a cardboard model of Grenfell Tower being burnt at a bonfire party in south-east London. You may recall that story when it broke. We now have charges against Paul Bassetti, who's aged 46, charged over a video posted online of a cardboard model of Grenfell Tower being burnt at a bonfire party in south-east London, confirmed by Scotland Yard. More on that, I sense, as our news bulletins progress. Right, to Ring Rees-Mogg with Jacob Rees-Mogg, who is a Conservative MP for North East Somerset, part, of course, of that all-powerful ERG group within the Conservative Party. Mr. Rees-Mogg, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, sir. When Ian Duncan-Smith says it would be a disaster to fight the EU elections in May, is your former party leader correct?
Ian Duncan-Smith is a wise man and an astute political commentator. That the circumstances of the European election will be almost as bad as you can imagine for the Conservative Party. Elected but without a majority to deliver on Brexit in 2017, promising that we would leave on the 29th of March, and now going to people and saying, oh, frightfully sorry, we said all of that, but we thought it'd be nice to have some European elections for you. How are you going to vote? It's not a line I feel that I can deliver with much confidence on the doorstep. In election that Tory voters have never been very excited by, that Tory voters tend to go out in European elections because they feel they have to, rather than because they think the European Parliament is an important or good organisation.
Will you canvass in the Euro elections?
If we've got elections, I'm a Tory, I'll do what I'm supposed to do. Will I be canvassing with enthusiasm and a spring in my step and a carnation in my buttonhole? No, probably not.
But because of your faith, you'll find it difficult to lie if you're challenged on the doorstep.
I'm not going to lie. Why would I lie? Why would I lie anyway? What is there to lie about?
Mr. Rees-Mogg, thank you for coming and knocking on my door in Somerset or wherever. Why on earth? There's no reason to vote Conservative, is there?
Yes, you should vote Conservative because you've been a supporter of the party for decades and this is a one-off blip.
But your party's let me down. I'm now this make-believe voter. Your party's let me down. I like you as a bloke. You always help me out. You helped me with the bypass and you managed to get it stopped or started or whatever it was. But you've let me down, you and your lot.
Yeah, I mean, that is the view of voters in North East Somerset, and this is being reported to me already. So, yes, that is true. That is true.
So why should I vote for you,
other than the Somerset accent, you're doing a very good imitation.
No, that was more of a London, wasn't it? And I wouldn't offend you. Why should I vote for you lot again?
Look, I think with all political parties, there are some occasions when one votes for the party because one believes that in the longer term and generationally, supporting that party is a good thing to do. I think a lot of Tories weren't enthusiastic when they voted Conservative in 1997, and yet a lot carried on doing so because it's important that the Tory party maintains a base of support and remains the major political party in our country.
Let's put this in real terms, because the line I've just been saying, I think, is exactly what Steve in Poole wants to ask you. Steve, you're through to Jacob Rees-Mogg. What's your question? Go ahead, sir. Good morning.
Good morning, Jacob.
Morning, Steve.
Right, I've been a Conservative supporter from the years that Mrs Thatcher was in government, and some of those years I've been a party member. I now feel totally let down by your party, Mrs May in particular. I'm going to support and vote for the Brexit Party. How do you think you're going to regain my trust and win back my votes?
Well, your question absolutely gets to the heart of the matter, because if you look at opinion polls, we are losing voters in your position. There was an excellent piece by Sir John Curtis in the Telegraph yesterday explaining that the people who were leaving the Conservative Party were people who voted Leave and feel that they have been let down. How do we win your trust back? Well, we have to deliver Brexit properly. We have to have left the European Union. And I think to do that, ultimately we're going to need different leadership. I think it's unlikely from this position that Mrs May can pull a rabbit out of the hat. She's already set out a timescale for her departure, and I think it will be a new leader who really believes in Brexit and wishes to deliver on the mandate, Steve, given to the party and to the country by people in your position, and to some extent in my position too.
Steve, a response from what you've heard?
My response? For me, Brexit is the clincher. If the Tory party change their leader and get Brexit through, a Brexit that I'm happy with, and I would have been totally happy with no deal, then I will come back to the party. But I am so infuriated by the mess they've made of it.
Steve?
Steve's point's absolutely, I think, where a lot of people are. The message I'm getting in Somerset is that people may or may not like me as the Member of Parliament, but that becomes secondary to the party's failure to deliver Brexit. And I think Steve's position is one reflected up and down the land.
Steve, thank you. Just coming back, thanks for your call, Steve. Have a good one, sir. Coming back to the point you make up and down the land, you quote yesterday's Sunday Telegraph. You may have seen the Daily Telegraph, I think the preceding week, research done by YouGov that shows regions in England and Wales, so I underlining everywhere, and we've just heard from Paul, you're talking about Somerset, everywhere, or save for London, had no problems with no deal. As you travel the country, I appreciate some. Is that the sense you get, Mr. Rees-Mogg?
Well, certainly speaking to Conservative associations, there was active enthusiasm for no deal as we got closer to the date and didn't have a good deal.
So how come she's so out of touch with the people of most of the people of England and Wales?
Well, I think the Prime Minister has one point where we should give her some credit, and that is she really believes that leaving without a deal would put the United Kingdom at risk. Now, as it happens, I don't think she's right, but I think it is a very heartfelt and sincere belief, and she doesn't want to be the Conservative or the Prime Minister who splits up the United Kingdom and loses Northern Ireland and potentially, in her view, Scotland as well. As I say, I don't share this view, but I think that is a very honest view for her to hold.
Let's go to Chris in Cheltenham. Chris, your question of Jacob Rees-Mogg. Go ahead, sir. Good morning.
Good morning. Mr. Rees-Mogg, apart from the fact that I totally agree with the previous caller, and as a lifelong Tory, I will not be voting for the Tories again while Mrs May has the leadership. There's something that has been getting to me all through this, and that is that the Remainers, be them Tories or Labour or of whichever colour, seem to forget that a public vote is not a request for government to enact a bill, it's an instruction, which they have clearly ignored. Would you agree?
Oh, Chris, not only would I agree, but I think it's worse than that. That you have a lot of politicians who accepted the referendum result, said they would deliver upon it, and have then decided to use every mechanism in the House of Commons to frustrate it, which I think is bad political behaviour.
Chris?
My other concern is how long will the Tories be in the wilderness after this mess?
Well, that's a very good question. I think the Suez comparison is the right one, that after Suez the Tory party looked unelectable, although opinion polling wasn't that bad, but it was in its early days in the 1950s. And with a new leader, the Tories were then able to win a majority of 100 at the 1959 general election. And if you can get the right leadership, the right policies, and establish yourself as being on the side of the people you represent, that's the key challenge. If we can do that, then we won't be in the wilderness. But if we carry on as we are, then we're facing a general election result like 1997.
It's fair to say the Conservative Party has form for being able to do this, doesn't it? Effectively self-immolate.
Oh, the self-immolation of the Conservative Party is a rare event. That all parties have periodic difficulties. Our biggest one was in the 1840s and then prior to 1906. And, of course, prior to 1997. So I don't think we're due for another one until about 2070. So this ought to be a stumble along the way from which we can recover rather than one of the really big splits.
And I'll try another time. Who might be the leader to take the party into better times and better territory?
Mr. Ferrari, as I say every time you ask me this question, there are so many talented people within the Conservative Party.
Broadchurch,
but look,
and on and on.
But it's noticeable how popular Boris Johnson is and that the appeal he has beyond Tory voters and Eurosceptics. There's a very good piece by him in the Telegraph this morning setting out some of the appeal that he has and some of what is needed. So I think he is currently leading the field.
Thank you. Chris, thank you. Paul in Deal, you're on the radio, Paul. Your question of Jacob Rees-Mogg. Yes.
Good morning to you both. Jacob, before Brexit, I didn't even know who you was, with the greatest of respect, like most of the Brexiteers. I've become extremely passionate about Brexit. I'm a Brexiteer myself. I was, until very recently, a Labour supporter because of the job that the industry that I'm in transport as a bus driver. You have to kind of like go with the leaders of the Union. I've now destroyed my Labour Party membership I have actually cancelled my membership to Unite. I've got no faith, not just in the Tories, where you represent, but I've got no faith in any of the mainstream politicians at all. I have now signed up to the Brexit Party, and I believe that a bloody nose is not on the way, but a nose to be broken, which will then create the bloody nose, is on the way. How are you going to help people like me and the millions of others? Because I don't just believe it's 17.4 million people that have been upset. It's also the people now that are extremely upset with politicians.
Got to move you to your
whole.
question now, Paul. So what is the actual question?
What's he going to do to give back his power and his ambition of making Brexit happen? Because his sister's just taken over.
Yes, well, my sister is much cleverer and more charismatic than I am, and is a very well, I think all sensible people would agree with that, and is a great catch for the Brexit Party. They are extremely lucky to have her.
Were you surprised when Annunziata announced what Annunziata announced on Friday?
I was not surprised. No, so many people are like Steve and Chris and Paul. Whatever party they've supported, they feel that the politicians have simply abandoned them and that the elite know best. And I accept all the criticisms that my criticising the elite sounds a bit ridiculous, but it is a body of people in Westminster who have decided to frustrate 17.4 million and, as Paul says, the people who accepted the result and believe in the democratic will of the nation being followed through. So I think his point is very interesting because it widens it to Labour, and these European elections aren't going to be good for the Labour Party either.
They're going to be good for anyone, Mr. Rees-Mogg.
They'll be good for Nigel Farage. They'll potentially, and more worryingly, be good for Tommy Robinson, because I think Nigel is absolutely within the pale of ordinary British politics, is a perfectly respectable individual. I'm much more concerned about Tommy Robinson and the move to the far right, and dare I say genuine far right rather than the Lammy-esque far right, which seems to include anybody.
We'll talk about him later.
So how do we get this back? Well, the Conservatives have to deliver Brexit. We have to do what we promised, Paul. It's as simple as that. Politicians don't deserve to do well if they don't deliver on the promises that they made. And Brexit means Brexit was such a clear and straightforward one, and now Brexit seems to mean retreat.
Quick response from you, Paul, then I must move on to other callers.
The very quick response is 6 months ago I surveyed 100 friends, and that includes people I work with. 43 of them said that if another election came in, they would still vote mainstream. I've asked that same 100 people 4 days ago exactly the same thing. We've now got 86 of them will not vote mainstream politicians because they have no faith in them whatsoever, and that is across party, not just Conservatives or Labour. Okay. So, that's 100 people that I know.
And that's very much underscores what you just said, Mr. Rees-Mogg, yeah.
I think this has been the most extraordinary divergence of the politicians from the electors. Parliament has set its face against the people. Ultimately, the people are the boss. And no sensible employee sets his face against his boss.
Thank you for that, Paul. Were your sister to stand in the European election constituency that incorporates your home, would you vote for her?
Well, she won't be standing in Somerset or in London. If she was standing in Somerset, I would vote in London, and if she was standing in London, I would vote in Somerset. I would not vote against my sister.
So you would move your vote to London?
Well, I'm on the register both in London and in Somerset.
Can you do that,
Yes,
then?
you can. I've got 2 genuine, full-blown residences. And in general elections, not surprisingly, though perhaps rather vainly, I vote for myself just to make sure I don't lose by 1 vote.
So you would only vote in London if Ms. Rees-Mogg were in Somerset? Yes.
I'm not going to vote against a member of my own family, but I'm not going to vote for the Brexit Party.
Should we go to other matters? Patrick in Warwick. Patrick, you're through to Jacob Rees-Mogg. Go ahead.
Good morning, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Jacob, I just want to read you a 3-line thing here. I put this up on a BBC, people who are interested in BBC yesterday.
The BBC, just remind me what that is. Is that a competitor second-tier station to leading Britain's conversation?
Indeed.
No, it's just it was actually a BBC site that you people who are interested in the BBC or have problems
Okay.
can and air their views.
Okay.
Right, I'll just read you what I wrote. Just watch a recording of Andrew Marr show this morning. David Lammy in Labour was allowed to rant and rave without interruption by arch-Remainer Andrew Marr, who seems scared of Lammy. I object to black racists being able to use our public broadcasting channel for his vile use.
Okay.
Bias Broadcasting Corporation continues. I would
All
just
right,
add,
I'm just going to go because one thing I'm very keen, and I've tried, Patrick, I'm not cutting you off, but I do think all parties need to tone down the level of the language. This country is in an extraordinary position. When Britain leaves, if Britain leaves, we're all going to have to sit down with our friends and our family and our colleagues and our employees and our employers and put the life back together. So I apologise on behalf of the term black racist. I know you've read it off a website. I don't for one second think, I don't agree with what Mr Lammy said, but I don't for one second think he's a racist, so I think we need to strike that. And also we're perhaps a little disobliging about Andrew Marr. That being said, it was an extraordinary attack levelled against you, Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Patrick, thank you for raising it. I think you're tough on Andrew Marr, who I thought handled the interview well.
I do too.
And fairly, and allowed Mr Lammy to make his point and then challenged it pretty robustly. I'm afraid I feel sorry for Mr Lammy, who is a normally serious political figure, a perfectly sensible one. I was on the Speaker's Advisory Committee for Works of Art in the House of Commons with him, and he struck me as a sensible...
He's meant to be a good bloke.
That's right. And when people start saying things like this, you realise they have lost all sense of proportion, that it's not in any sense a wise comment. It's so patently not true. That
Well, I could say you would say that, wouldn't you? But then the detractors to you would say, why would you endorse a line from the AfD, Alternative für Deutschland?
Well, I didn't endorse it.
You retweeted it.
I put something on Twitter that was interesting, and it's undeniably interesting, from the leading opposition party.
Do you regret
in
that
Germany.
action now?
No, I don't, because...
Would you
I
retweet
think,
something else from AfD?
Well, I'm meeting at lunchtime, and looking forward to meeting at lunchtime, Nancy Pelosi, who is the Democrat leader of the House of Representatives. As a politician, you come into contact with other politicians. That doesn't mean an endorsement or a non-endorsement. It is just saying this is part of the political conversation. And your point on language is, I think, relevant. That politicians meet people and discuss things, and that's what we have to do, and it should be within those confines. But to compare a group within the House of Commons to an organisation that killed 6 million Jewish people and millions of others as well is just senseless. It doesn't do anything, it doesn't help political debate, it is mere abuse that makes the person saying it look foolish and second-rate, rather than doing any damage to the people it's levelled against. And I would say that, wouldn't I? Well, what am I being accused of? I'm being accused of standing up for 17.4 million people who, in a referendum, voted to leave the European Union.
Well, and also lauding sentiments, broadcasting sentiments from an organisation that has some rather questionable policies and practices as in Germany. That seems to be what's on your charge sheet, Mr. Rees-Mogg.
Well, that's completely trivial. I mean, that is an absurd thing to say, that one shouldn't bring to people's attention interesting and important things that are said in foreign countries without being deemed to endorse them and to be part of them.
Yes.
I neither endorse them nor am I part of them.
But you don't see it as a mistake?
No, I don't. We need to have a proper discussion, and we need to understand what is being discussed in the continent. And the continent has a much greater problem with extremism than this country does. This country has always had a very moderate polity. If in the 2015 election, the most right-wing in this country was Nigel Farage, and the most left-wing was Ed Miliband, there was nothing really to worry about. And that, I think, is a very safe position for us to be in. In other continental countries, that's not true. But it's useful that people should know what these people are saying and what the debate is.
And lastly, on this, to my point, do you sense there's been, I don't know if the word is a coarsening of the language, there's been an ugly side of language where people now have a debate and they are automatically a Nazi or a Stalinist or a gammon or a racist or whatever it might be, or a traitor, let's come to the other side, or a traitor to the people, this ludicrous language.
I try and discourage my own side from using language of this kind because I don't think it's helpful, I don't think it's a good form of debate. But has it coarsened? If you think it has, just read Disraeli's speeches on Peel, and you realise that we were much ruder about each other in the middle 19th century than we are now.
I shall spend my Good Friday doing that, catching up with that. Scott, it's interesting, we haven't come into London. I don't say this critical at all, since we haven't come to a London call yet. Scott in Manchester, go ahead, sir, good morning.
Thanks, Vico.
Yes, go ahead, Scott.
I just wanted to speak to Jacob, basically, because I followed this for, like, a good few years. I do a blog about politics and stuff like that. And
right.
To be honest, recently I was quite surprised that I'd be agreeing with someone like from a very different background to myself, with Jacob. And I thought, yeah, we've finally found someone here he understands British values and he's properly representing those voiceless people. And
Right.
I thought, and watch him in Parliament, and he'd speak up for people, and I thought, yeah, it was great.
So what's your question to Mr Rees-Mogg then, Scott, if I can move you to that?
Yeah, of course, yeah. The problem I've got with him is, recently he was doing everything perfect, and then pressure got put onto the ERG, and because pressure was too much, and he nosedived straight into everybody what he didn't, and then he agreed to May's deal, so he got found out.
Okay.
Because you agreed to May's deal, you got found out. If you didn't, if you stopped, you would now be considered as one of the leading candidates for the Conservative Party, and you would have swayed masses of people from the Labour Party to join you.
Did you regret I think you did describe it holding your nose and voting? Did I hear that line attributed to you?
I don't know whether I actually said that, but it's a line that's been used by people who did vote for it. Scott, the issue was that if I didn't vote for her deal, we were going to have a long delay. We've now got that long delay, and it may get worse. I thought it was better to be out on the 29th of March and to have accepted a deal I dislike than to find we were still in the European Union. I'm afraid I think my friends who voted for no deal, for keeping Mrs May's deal off the table, were allowing the best to be the enemy of the good, and that I think it's really important that we are out of the European Union. If we could have left with no deal, I'd have been very happy about that, but the Prime Minister wasn't going to deliver that, in spite of all her previous commitments. On the second vote, I still thought if her deal didn't go through, we would leave without a deal, and that was the logic of voting against her deal. Once that became impossible, that she had decided otherwise, then the hierarchy was no deal, Mrs May's deal, not leaving. And therefore I had to go for Mrs May's deal over not leaving. And I'm afraid I would do the same again. We must be legally out of the European Union, and then with different leadership it can be made better.
Scott, thank you. Ian in Stafford. Ian, you're through to Jacob Rees-Mogg. Go ahead. Morning to you.
Morning, both. So I wanted to ask you about Julian Assange and your views on whether or not you think that the whole asylum system and the premise in which he secured asylum was just one big hypocrisy, really, given that if his intention with the part he played in exposing the supposed war crimes committed by the American military was to hold them account to breaching law, should he not therefore work within the legal system that is making allegations against him and stand within those systems and defend and follow that due process? It just seems very hypocritical, the whole asylum.
Ian, thank you. It's an interesting question. Dare I say, I think Mr Assange is a deeply trivial individual who has got far more attention than he deserves, and was getting frightfully upset that people were saying that inside the embassy he was very smelly, and that sort of level of debate that this has got down to. If he's a great freedom fighter, he should stand up and face his day in court and say, this is what I did and this is why I did it. America has a very good justice system, not as good as ours, but nonetheless a very good one, and he should make his case. Perhaps he should have gone to Sweden to face allegations of rape of a very serious kind.
Which he denies.
Which he denies, but the allegations are,
yes, of course,
are serious.
Yeah, of course.
And which he ran away from. And by and large, people who run away, one thinks less well of, as with the man who ran away after the speedboat accident, and has got an extra 6 months in prison for it. I think people who are involved in these areas need to stand up for what they've done, and I don't think Mr Assange is that important, and I think he's got too much attention, and frankly, I'm rather bored of him.
Ian, thank you. Let's get a couple of questions from the emails here. This from Rachel in Bexley. Was the government right to terminate the contract of the building advisor Sir Roger Scruton for his views on Hungarian and Chinese people?
I haven't looked at the context of everything that he said, but what he said about Chinese people was clearly an attack on a communist government, not on Chinese individuals. He was saying that what the Chinese state tries to do is turn Chinese people into automatons. And that is not a racist comment. That is a comment about an authoritarian, totalitarian government that makes people fit in with its plans. I haven't looked at the comments he made on Hungarian people, but I think...
And Islamophobia is an inverted form of propaganda was another of his suggestions.
Well...
should he have gone?
It's a very... as I say, I haven't looked at everything that he said. I think when you take individual lines from a philosopher who has said many, many things, if he hasn't said anything that you can't quote out of context and find that it's challenging, then he can't be much of a philosopher. And therefore the government has to decide really whether it ever wants to appoint philosophers or whether it will always give in to a little storm on Twitter.
Dan in Marylebone, you're on the radio. Dan, good morning.
Hey, good morning. Good morning, Jacob.
Morning, Dan.
Just a quick one from me, Jacob. I had pretty much made up my mind already to leave the European Union, but I think the straw that broke the camel's back for myself was a speech I saw you give to an Oxford University dinner, where you described the three pillars of the European institution and how it's not a democratic institution. And I don't think many people know one example that you gave there about when the Commission took the Council to the ECJ on their own pay. And I'd like for you to put that to the public and for people like James O'Brien, who's following up later, to be able to respond to it.
We speak well of each other. This is what I'm trying to encourage, and I'm sure Jacob will speak well. What was the key? What do you recall exactly what it was, Jacob Rees-Mogg, that clearly turned Dan onto your ideas?
Yes, well, what happened was during the financial crisis, the Council decided that there was such a crisis that the automatic pay increases shouldn't go through. So the Commission took the Council to the European Court, and the European Court ruled that no, all these pay increases should go through in spite of the financial crisis, including, of course, the pay of the judges themselves, in breach of one of the fundamental principles of justice, that you should never be a judge in your own cause. And I think this was one of the most ridiculous aspects of the EU and showed an inner corruption.
Dan, thank you. And thank you for doing it so briefly, because we're 1 minute over. But a final question, I'm sure Jacob and Rees-Mogg can spare. Yasser in Mitcham. Yasser, you'll have the last question of today for Jacob Rees-Mogg. Go ahead.
Good morning, how are you all?
Morning, Yasser. Thank you for calling.
I've just got one question, with something different from Brexit. It's just that, what's your opinion of the government's policy of teaching children who are under 5 years old about LGBT? What's your opinion on that matter?
Oh, my opinion is very straightforward. I think these are matters for parents, not for the state. I think we're increasingly intruding into family life. I'm concerned about the proposals that home education should go on a register, because all that does is make a nuisance of itself for law-abiding parents and does very little to find out parents who are not abiding by the law. And I'm deeply suspicious.
You've got to keep some record of home education, children, don't you?
Why? We don't currently.
Well, how do you know what happens to them?
The principal responsibility for looking after children lies with parents, unless the state can show there is some cause for the state to intervene. It's not the other way round. Parents don't have to show to the state they're being good parents.
But how do you know if the child's being educated?
Well, at the moment you don't. But there is a legal obligation on the parents to educate their children.
But isn't it a good idea a local authority or something goes round and checks?
No, it's not a good idea for some official to come round and check when most parents who are home educating are doing things extremely properly, because...
But most?
Yes, but...
Not all, Mr. Rees-Mogg.
Most...
Don't you want to help the little kiddie whose mum and dad have absolutely no interest in his or her life at all?
But you could apply this to children who are going to school. Are they being fed properly at home?
Well, at least...
You make your inquiries when you've got evidence that there is something to inquire into.
But you don't even know this child. You don't even know how she's getting on. They might be getting no education at all.
The evidence is that this is a very, very slight problem, and that most people who do it properly.
But you keep
and
saying
you're creating,
most,
of course, but it's always most, Mr. Ferrari. that most children going to school turn up to school. Some play truant. Most people going to school have parents who care for them. But there are some parents who don't look after their children properly.
You're very much at odds with the government on this.
I am, yeah. But I think...
And your colleague Damien Hines.
Damien's...
I know you're going to say he's a wonderful chap. They always are wonderful chaps.
and one of my oldest friends in politics.
That's the other thing. We were at Eton together, weren't
we were at Trinity, Oxford together.
There we go, I knew it.
And he's godfather to one of my children, and is a great man. But I think that governments in opposition are in favour of individual liberty. And when they're in government, they suddenly decide that they've got to regulate everything. We've gone perfectly well with home education without having a state register. Why suddenly do we need to have one?
But if we come to Yasser's central point, which is this LGBT classes, how is a little Jewish boy, Orthodox Jewish boy, or devout Muslim boy, how is he ever going to learn about LGBT matters?
It's a matter for parents.
But they don't believe it. They don't.
Under 5? Oh, for heaven's sake, why do you need to teach a child under 5 about sex education?
Because surely his mate's got 2 dads.
Surely that's a matter for the parents.
But his parents are really, unfortunately, quite homophobic. What happens then?
I don't think you can generalise about how parents behave. And surely we have religious freedom in this country, so people are allowed to teach their children their religious faith.
But how will that little boy or girl ever learn about her friend who's got 2 mummies, or her friend
What you're saying is, how will that little boy or girl ever have views that the politically correct agree with? That's a completely different question.
Well, we want tolerance of someone who's got 2 mummies.
That's right, we want tolerance.
Right, but
that's not what's being talked about.
But if they're living in a house where it's seen as a sin for same-sex relationships, and you've got dad or mum sitting there banging that this is outrageous, how can 2 men ever do this? And this little kid's just getting inculcated.
Parents are absolutely entitled to teach their children the fundamentals of their religion.
To perpetuate homophobia?
No, it doesn't.
Or transphobia?
I don't think phobia comes from an understanding of religious belief. Certainly not in the Christian context.
You don't think, lastly, you clearly benefited from an upbringing where your parents invested hugely. I have no doubt you invest time hugely in your children. Fortunately, you don't think we're sitting here as incredibly privileged blokes, where there are many kids out there who don't have that kind of background, who have, I'm going to say, racist or homophobic parents who are continuing to perpetuate those lines.
Do you know that's the most snobbish thing I've ever heard you say? And I could not disagree with you more strongly. In all my experience...
I'm not talking about money. When I say invest, I didn't mean financially, sorry. Okay. I meant invest time. I'm so sorry. Invest time.
Of all the canvassing I've done, of all the people I've met, almost every parent you ever meet has the greatest concern about his or her children.
Almost.
But not all. It's almost whether they're from a privileged background or they're from a deprived background. It's not to do with money, it's to do with
time,
with the parents.
With time.
And how much...
Your mum and dad spent time. My mum and dad spent time. Some of these kids don't get... When I say invest, I mean invest time. But they don't get it, Jacob. Or Mr. Rees-Mogg.
We're getting very informal now, Nicholas. I think, of course, there are some bad parents.
Yes.
But you've got to weigh that against the overwhelming majority of parents who are good parents, regardless of their socioeconomic background, and who are doing their best for their children and who devote their lives to looking after their children. And that the state interfering for the very, very small numbers who have bad parents becomes disproportionate. You want to do it on the basis of evidence. So you want to have social services that intervene. You want to have people who look out for children in the way that is done.
Well, that's called teachers.
It can be teachers, but it can be people in hospitals. It can be GPs. It's a range of people, but that the fundamental responsibility is with parents, the overwhelming majority of whom care just as much about their children as your parents did about you and my parents did about me.
Yes, indeed, I don't know what you started between the two of us.
Still, in the case of my mother, who's still going strong, still does care just as much as ever. And,
well, God bless your mother. A joyous Easter to you and your family.
Et cum spirito tuo.
And all celebrations alike. LBC News 9:37.
A man has been charged over a video posted online of a cardboard model of Grenfell Tower being burnt at a bonfire party. 46-year-old Paul Bassetti from South East London is accused of sending grossly offensive material and is due in court later this month. Millions of people who rent their homes in England are being promised more protection under new government plans. The proposals would stop private landlords evicting tenants at short notice and without good reason. Social media companies like Facebook and Instagram may have to turn off the like function for children